Thank you very much. Well, we will debate a hot subject, and I will go through the facts quite quickly because you know them well. So if you start with, estrogens have been invented a long time ago. So nature cannot invent a substance that is toxic or a substance that is contraindicated. First argument, it has been made its proofs since several billions of years. In spite of that, some people made a study called the Women's Health Initiative, where they pretended that the overall health risks exceeded the benefits. That has been published in 2002, to a big astonishment at that time. The authors have been prudent. They said, well, there have been a lot of studies saying the opposite, but now we have one study saying that estrogens are dangerous. What made the media out of it? They said, well, now we know that estrogens are dangerous. So that was a black year. And at our Swiss Carnival in Basel, we had a black lantern to show how sad we have been at that time. And a completely unknown politician at that time pretended that nature should be great again and hormones are a disaster. What happened at that time, really? If you look at this Women's Health Initiative, you realize that there have been 3 primary goals. Primary benefit has been coronary heart disease, primary risk invasive breast cancer, and has been a quite undefined global index. So that was all that has been demanded from the study. But the conclusions drawn have been much more important. What has been in this study? Let us look at the population. It was an awful population. They have been mainly overweight or obese. They had hypertension, about 40% in one arm, and other risk factors of CVD. They had no symptoms. There has been only peroral administration, and they had all been in the late postmenopause. So really not the people we would treat today with estrogens. So a good study done in the wrong population. Because the result has been difficult to comment, the authors invented something quite special. They didn't use the adjusted values, they used the nominal values. And if you follow their logic, taking the nominal values, you had in fact some risks. If you take the adjusted values, as it should have been done, what came out was only an increased VTE-Risk and a decreased fracture risk. That was all. And they did another trick to put it through into the media. They manipulated the scale by 60. That was the way it was presented. But if you present it in a normal way, it would have that. Nothing at all that was interesting and that was dangerous. But the patients have been insecure. And the classical patient said, shall I keep my hormones until they are fashionable again? You know what happened then. Consumption came down. But what are now the facts? What do we know since then? It is evident that estradiol is highly efficient in the primary indication for HRT, that is treating hot flushes and other menopausal symptoms. That is valid for the oral and the transdermal administration. So this point is clear. We know that quality of life is significantly better in estrogen users. You see here the score in the women with HRT, eminent point in favor of HRT2. And we know that sexual life is much better in women using HRT than not using HRT. Again, an important point our patients have to know. And then we have the gain on bone. You see that fracture rate is decreasing significantly. A good point for hormone administration again. And we even know that fracture-free survival is much longer with HRT than without HRT. That is an old study before the Women's Health Initiative. And since then we learned by Christiansen that this effect is maintained for at least 15 years. A strong point again in favor of HRT. And then we have the high impact on Alzheimer's risk. If you start early and you can continue your administration of estradiol for a long time, you have a much lower risk to be later an Alzheimer's patient than if you have no HRT. And if you have the male to compare, you are near the male risk, and that is a very low risk. Again, a strong point for estradiol. Now, let us go to the risks that will, I think, the second speaker stress. What about breast cancer? If you go to the Women's Health Initiative, the study that has been invented to bring down estrogens, you see that there is no increased risk even if you combine CEE and MPA. There is no significant difference here. And for E2 alone, there might be a protective effect. We'll come back to that later. But if you have a closer look at the combined arm, you see that the later increased risk, or at least not better situation for the combination, is not due to an increased risk of the arm where the women received C and MPA, but to a falsely low risk in placebo. That would be the normal risk, normal incidence going up with age in the healthy controlled population. And by a factor we don't know, the placebo arm in the study has been unusually low. So that is not an argument to say that these substances are dangerous. If you go now to the CE alone arm, you see that estrogens lowered the risk in the adjusted for adherence population, intention to treat population. As we know today, that is due because CE have been used by specific effect, most probably specific effect of CE, having in this combination, this cocktail of hormones, something like a SERM2. Even total mortality is decreasing. And breast cancer mortality is decreasing. So how can we pretend that this combination is dangerous for the patients taking it? Impossible. They are protected. If you go now to the European side, where not CE is used, but estradiol, exactly the same. You have here the women receiving estradiol alone in the Danish top study. Here the combined administration E2 and NETA. The risk is not increased, just trend to a decreased risk, even in this study using a completely different combination. Again, how can you pretend that this combination is dangerous? And if you look at breast cancer mortality in ERT and HRT users, it has been put together by a group very early and completed by the newer studies up to 2012, you see that not one of these studies has an increased risk in breast cancer mortality in HRT users. So why should it be dangerous? And then we have the French data showing that the risk, if it is increased, might be linked to some progestogens. On the opposite, if you use progesterone or dihydrotestosterone, the risk is not increased. And then there are many, many other factors increasing the risk, but really increasing the risk. For instance, French fries, very dangerous. Don't eat French fries anymore. The risk is significantly increased. Or left-handedness, high risk factor, 2.41. Or to be a flight attendant, but specifically in Iceland Air, a very high risk, 4.1. Or if you use an electric blanket, again, a very high risk. So that are the real risks. If you go to CVD now, and we look at the Nurses Health Study, you see that the adjusted relative risk is significantly lowered in HRT users. That is the risk for death because of a severe coronary heart disease. So again, it is protective. The same has been shown even by the Women's Health Initiative. They didn't like it, but they had at the end to accept it. If you are going the population less than 10 years from menopause, it is protective. You see here the relative risk. Even in the combined arm, and we know that MPA is not a good drug, it is not increased. Back to Europe again, the same Danish study. Here you have the HRT arm. here the controls, and you see that the risk of death is much higher if you have no HRT than if you have HRT, and it is significant. Again, a strong point in favor of HRT. And then we learned something very important from the Danish. You have to exclude first women at risk, here diabetes. If you take the current users with diabetes, the risk is indeed increased, but not in the non-users. Now we have to go back to Women's Health Initiative. We had women with diabetes, we had women with hypertension, women have been obese, so I'm not astonished that there some women have an increased risk. That's natural. And total mortality, here the calculation by Sir Peter, is significantly lower in women using HRT. And even the Women's Health Initiative had to accept that the risk is lowered in the age group 50 to 59. A reduction by 30% of all-cause mortality. That's not nothing. The other risks, VTE-Risk, we have to accept that at the beginning of the treatment with oral E2 or CE, we have an increased risk. But if you give transdermal E2, this risk disappears. Nothing left. And we know here too that the choice of the progestogen has an impact. Micronized progesterone has not an increased risk. And we know for dydrogesterone it's the same. Whereas norprognanes have an increased risk. So we can do a lot about lowering the risk. So that was about in 2004. And then the newspaper said the dangers of HRT were overplayed and we hoped it will be better again and normalized. Another journal said HRT cancer fears eased for thousands. Looked good. But what happened then, same year, some days later, now women on HRT are warned they face higher risk of stroke. So again, for home on exit. What is this about this risk of stroke? Because it has been an invention. In the CEE trial, you had no increased risk. In the CEE+MPA trial, there has been increased risk. But again, it is MPA and not progesterone. But is that real? It is not real. But before we go back to the study of Susan Hendricks, let us look at transdermal E2. And they have no increased risk. And if used combined with transdermal E2 progesterone or dydrogesterone, the risk remains low. And the same study, that was the analysis from Renu, oral HRT had, as expected, an increased risk. That was compatible with Susan Hendricks. But Susan Hendricks, far away on the left page of her article, published an interesting detail that has been never repeated in all reanalyses of the Women's Health Initiative. She used the Framingham Stroke Risk Score. And if you look at the lowest tertile, the first tertile, you have no increased risk. And in this lowest tertile, all women at risk have been excluded. That means hypertensive women, women that have been obese, etc. So a normal woman has no increased risk. Only the third tertile, the second tertile had an increased risk. For reasons I cannot understand, it has never been mentioned again in later publications of the Women's Health Initiative. They wanted that the risk remains increased. And if you're going now to the Danish study again, Danish Nurses Study, you find exactly the confirmation. Normotensive women in green have no increased risk, yet the current users, whereas hypertensive patients have an increased risk. That is not unexpected for us. You can calculate it, and it has to be found. And if you add a progestin, then the risk is even more increased. That was NETA in that case. If you are normotensive, the combination E2 and NETA had no increased risk. So in a healthy patient using a normal E2 combined with normal progesterone, stroke risk is not increased. We had the impression in 2003 that Jacques Roustoff guessed at that time already that his interpretation was wrong. He said, that as a citation I noted at Bucharest, the Nurses Study and ones like it could be right, and the Women's Health Initiative could be wrong, or vice versa. But he never let me publish that officially. And then came a late confession from the States. WHI results are being used inappropriately in making decisions about treatment for women in their 40s and 50s. A bit late and a bit weak, but at least it was a confession. And then we have 2 studies showing that withholding HRT is increasing risk and killing people. The Kaiser Permanente study found that the withdrawal of E2 in many, many women in the US corresponds to 43,000 avoidable fractures per year. That's a lot. Many of these people will die. And there we have, we cited him, Philip Sarell, who published a nice study that we have an estimated 58,000 avoidable deaths by not giving HRT to women who should have it. So there is a window of opportunity, and that is the whole story about it. If you respect the window of opportunity, know it well, then you have not an increased risk, and it is a crime not to give HRT to women with an indication for it. Again, the first argument to give HRT is the effect on climacteric syndrome. You see the red line, that is the Menopause Rating Scale 2. The red line shows the result after 6 months. Everybody is down with the symptoms and feeling well. That was the beginning with a high intensity of symptoms. So it works. If you look at the cumulative 13-year data in the age group 50 to 59, that have been the data from Lobo in 2014, and it completed, you see that we have always a negative change. Less coronary heart diseases, less myocardial infarction, less diabetes mellitus, less fractures here, hip fractures, less stroke, pulmonary embolism in this study increased because we had no transdermal data to put in, the numbers are too small. Breast cancer, less, all cancers, minus 18, total mortality minus 12. That is a strong argument that HRT is not dangerous, and the opposite, it is quite preventive. And if you put all the data together, I took here the basic slide from Richard Santon, he published in 2010, and I added the transdermal value. If you look at fractures, it is on the good side, that is to the right. Look at diabetes, to the good side, it's on the right. Breast cancer, if you use MPA, it's negative. If you see alone, it's positive. If you E2 and progesterone, it's more or less neutral, but not negative. Colorectal cancer, that's a special case. It's only positive in women using peroral CEE. Overall mortality going to the right, protection. Coronary heart disease going to the right, protection. Endometrial cancer, if you look at the big analysis, it is slightly positive. Lung cancer, I think there we don't have a final opinion. The numbers are quite small. The venous thrombotic episodes are going to the left, that is negative. But if you give it perorally, you have no negative impact. Stroke, if you give perorally, no negative impact. And if you exclude, even in peroral administration, the high-risk patients, no negative impact. Last point, MPA. All the big studies in the United States have been done with MPA. MPA, from my eyes, is the thing you should avoid. Just to show you one example, the effect of CEE and MPA and CEE alone on the depression score. You see that MPA is completely neutralizing the beneficial effect of CEE alone. So really, it is not a thing we should use. I think that has been responsible for the bad renommee of HRT in the States. But the problem is, it takes a few months to publish wrong data, and it takes 10 years to correct it, as Klaus Christiansen said some years ago. So, what are the dangers, to put it together, of withholding MHT? You have a higher fracture risk, higher mortality rate, lower quality of life, more eugenital problems, we couldn't discuss it. You have a compromised sex life. you're high risk for Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. If you have as a motor symptoms, you have a higher cardiovascular risk, a higher risk for depression, and even higher risk for osteoporosis than in the women without VMS. So it's an awkward situation not to take HRT if there is an indication. So, please say yes, it is unethical to endanger women by withholding MHT. But then we have this guy here, we all like him, we are fond of him. So I have some difficult to understand why he will speak against it. I think there has been a conspiracy by these three politicians of the UK, and I think they told him if you say HRT is good, they wouldn't let him go back to the UK. And there is another theory. You know this dame, a very unladylike dame. And I think she made a conspiracy with the PETA people, menacing him, if you are being in favor of estrogens, we will do something very bad to you or to your family. So he has been forced to say what he will say now. Thank you for your attention.